The steel-toed boot of Commander Xyloth smashed into the deformed leg of the helpless Vorkarian girl, Deneb, making her scream out in agony as Ricky Rice, broken and bloody from relentless Vorkarian torture, watched in horror and rage, powerless to save her until she would risk everything to save him. Ricky's weapons were gone, vaporized along with his ship when he crash-landed on planet Vorkar, homeworld of the vicious Vorkarians, locked in a bitter war against humanity. Injured from the crash, Ricky hardly had time to drag himself from the twisted wreckage before a Vorkarian patrol led by the sadistic commander Xyloth captured him. They hauled Ricky to a fortified military base, where Xyloth took great pleasure in torturing the human soldier for information on battle plans. Through the haze of pain, Ricky saw how the Vorkarians treated one of their own, a disabled girl named Deneb. Born with a deformed leg on a world that prized fighting prowess above all else, Deneb was cruelly abused and mistreated. She was a genius with Vorkarian weapons tech, but that earned her no respite. Xyloth forced Deneb to work grueling hours repairing guns and tanks despite her constant agony. When Ricky refused to break under torture, Xyloth sentenced him to death before a firing squad. But as the pulse rifles fired, they suddenly malfunctioned, sabotaged by Deneb. Seizing the chance, Ricky killed the guards and escaped into the wastelands. Xyloth was enraged and vowed to hunt down the human. He knew Deneb had aided Ricky's escape. Injured and alone on a hostile world, Ricky had to call on every ounce of training and willpower to survive. He scavenged for meager food and water, all while evading the elite Vorkarian kill teams hunting him like an animal. He could only imagine the cruelty Deneb must be enduring for helping him. He thought Xyloth must have executed her. Until he found her broken body dumped in the desert, left for dead by Xyloth as punishment for her betrayal. In that moment, Ricky knew he couldn't leave her. The human and the alien girl, discarded by her own people, formed an unlikely bond as he slowly nursed her back to health, falling in love. But Xyloth was still coming for them, thirsting for blood and vengeance. To survive, Ricky and Deneb would have to fight for their lives against murderous alien hunters out to kill them both, or die trying in each other's arms under the cruel alien suns. Ricky half-carried Deneb through the winding tunnels of the hidden cave system they had discovered, her frail body leaning against his muscular frame. The jagged rocks cut into his skin, but he ignored the pain, focused only on getting as far away from the Vorkarian patrols as possible. There, he pointed to a small alcove, barely visible in the dim light filtering through cracks in the stone. We can rest there for a bit. He gently set Deneb down, propping her up against the damp wall. She grimaced as her twisted legs straightened but quickly masked the pain with a brave smile. "I'll see if I can find us some food and water," Ricky said, unsheathing his knife. "You work on setting up some of those traps you were talking about." Deneb nodded, already rummaging through the satchel of scavenged tech parts slung over her shoulder. The cave openings are perfect choke points. With a few tripwires and remote detonators, I can rig them to collapse if Xyloth's goons try to follow us in here. As Ricky foraged for edible roots and fungi and searched for underground streams, Deneb's nimble fingers assembled an array of vicious traps. Laser tripwires connected to salvaged pulse mines. Remotely triggered charges wedged into stress points in the cave roof. Repurposed construction exoframes fashioned into deadly rockfall traps. Over the next few days, they fell into a routine, Ricky focusing on keeping them fed and hydrated, Deneb on fortifying their subterranean refuge. And during the long nights huddled together for warmth under the golden glow of lumicum lamps, they taught each other new skills to help them survive. Like this, Ricky adjusted Deneb's grip on his hunting knife, guiding her through a series of slashes and stabs. Let the enemy's own momentum do the work. Twist as you pull the blade out to maximize damage. "I see," Deneb nodded. Vorkarian armor has weak points at the inner elbow, under the chin, and behind the knees to allow flexibility. Strike there and you can reach vital arteries. Hour by hour, day by day, their bond grew, tempered by shared hardship and forged in a perseverance to make it out together. Ricky started seeing Deneb's deformity not as a liability, but as a source of strength, driving her to be twice as clever and tenacious as any able-bodied Vorkarian. And Deneb began to realize that human berserker blood had given Ricky not savagery, but bottomless grit with the capacity to care for others burned out of most Vorkarians by their callous warrior culture. But the peace could only last so long. One evening, the unmistakable cracks of pulse rifles and the concussive thuds of plasma grenades shattered their temporary sanctuary. "They've found us!" Deneb cried, snatching up an electrified mace and dragging herself towards the front passages, where her traps lay in wait. "Get behind me!" Ricky yelled as the first Vorkarian troops stormed into the cave mouth, only to be blown to shreds by Deneb's homemade claymores. Wave after wave of elite troopers poured into the caves, trying to force their way through the deadly obstacle course of traps and determined defenders. Ricky tackled a soldier attempting to flank them, snapping the Vorkarian's neck with a savage twist. Deneb bashed in the skull of another with her mace, sparks from the electrified head illuminating her face contorted in desperate fury. Back to back they fought, Deneb's traps and Ricky's brutal close-quarter skills taking down Vorkarian after Vorkarian. But there were always more to take their place. They fell back, buying a few moments of breathing room each time a charge took out a cluster of attackers or a passage flooded with rubble. Until finally they found themselves pinned in the very alcove where they had made their stand. Enemies in heavy exo-armor advancing on them from all sides, energy shields shimmering. Ricky was drenched in sweat and purple Vorkarian blood. Deneb sagged against the wall, all but spent. This was it. But like Deneb had noticed when she first met him, Ricky never surrendered, not while he still had breath left. He grabbed Deneb's last two mines, primed them, and jammed his knife into a fissure in the cave wall above them. "Hold on to me!" he screamed as he ripped the blade down, the entire cave roof cracking with an awful groan. The next moment, the world collapsed on the Vorkarian troops as hundreds of tons of rock thundered down, burying them alive. Ricky threw himself over Deneb as debris pounded them and clouds of dust choked out all light and air. An eternity later, Ricky shifted the rubble off of them and dragged Deneb out into open air. For a moment, they just lay there, breathing, marveling that they were still alive. Only to see a Vorkarian dreadnought descending from the sky, weapons already trained on them. They were dead. Xyloth had won. But when the ramp lowered and a hulking Vorkarian stepped out, Deneb gasped. It was no soldier. It was her father, Admiral Korgan, a ghost returning from the grave to save his daughter. And he had not come alone. Other vessels were landing, a mismatched fleet of rebel craft here to spirit Ricky and Deneb to safety. "He's alive!" Deneb cried. "And he's brought help. We're saved, Rick." Her words cut off as a familiar figure jetted overhead on a grav harness, plasma cannon already glowing in his hands. Xyloth had come to finish the job himself. As Admiral Korgan rallied the rebel ships and Xyloth's troops deployed for battle, Ricky and Deneb staggered to their feet, ready for one last fight. In the face of impossible odds, they would go down together, making a final stand for their forbidden love amidst the crucible of war. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air as Ricky dragged Deneb behind a jagged outcropping. Xyloth's troops swarmed through the canyon like insects, their chitinous armor glinting in the harsh sunlight. "We're cut off!" Deneb shouted over the din of battle. Ricky scanned the terrain, his mind racing. Not yet, we're not. See those narrow passages? Perfect for funneling them into kill zones. He grabbed fallen pulse rifles, setting them to overload and wedging them into cracks along the canyon walls. As Vorkarian soldiers poured through the tight spaces, the rifles detonated, sending shrapnel and bodies flying. Meanwhile, Deneb's fingers flew across her datapad. I'm in their targeting systems, scrambling now. Vorkarian weapons began to misfire, soldiers clutching smoking rifles in confusion. But it wasn't enough. Wave after wave of troops pushed forward, driving Ricky, Deneb, and the rebel Vorkarians back toward a sheer cliff face. Ricky gritted his teeth. This was it. They were done for. A thunderous roar split the sky. Ricky looked up to see bulky shapes hurtling through the clouds. Human dropships! Armored transports swooped low, disgorging squads of heavily armed Marines. The air filled with the chatter of assault rifles as the human soldiers laid down suppressing fire. "Move! Move!" Ricky shouted, half-carrying Deneb toward the landing zone. Rebel Vorkarians fell in behind them, providing covering fire as they retreated. They were so close, just a few more meters to safety. Then the world erupted in fire. Hidden artillery batteries opened up, raining superheated plasma onto the landing zone. One of the dropships took a direct hit, exploding in a fireball that sent shrapnel slicing through the air. The flaming wreckage blocked the path of the other transports. "We have to clear a path," Admiral Corgan bellowed, his scarred face contorted with effort as he returned fire. "Push through to the ships." The Admiral stepped out from cover to direct his troops. A split second later, his head snapped back, a precision shot from a Vorkarian sniper, leaving a smoking hole in his forehead. "Father!" Deneb screamed as Corgan's body crumpled to the ground. Ricky grabbed her, pulling her back as enemy fire intensified. "We can't help him now, we have to move!" With Xyloth's reinforcements closing in, they had no choice but to fight their way to the dropships. Ricky and Deneb moved as one, covering each other's blind spots as they battled through the storm of enemy fire. Deneb tapped furiously at her wrist computer. A swarm of combat drones buzzed to life, zipping through the air to harry the Vorkarian forces. They were almost there. Just a few more steps to the waiting dropship. Deneb's fingers flew across her datapad one last time. "Initiating planetary defense grid overload. Now!" A wave of electromagnetic energy pulsed outward. Vorkarian weapons and armor sparked and died, buying them precious seconds. Ricky and Deneb sprinted the final distance, collapsing into the dropship as it lifted off. But their respite was short-lived. As they broke atmosphere, a massive shape shimmered into view. The Vorkarian dreadnought opened fire, a direct hit sending the dropship into an uncontrolled spin. Alarms blared as the craft plummeted toward a desolate moon below. Ricky pulled Deneb close, their eyes locked as the ground rushed up to meet them. This was the end. At least they'd face it together. Together. The impact never came. Instead, Ricky felt a sudden jolt as the escape pod shot free from the doomed dropship. He clung tightly to Deneb as they tumbled through the air, the pod's stabilizers fighting to keep them level. With a lurch, the parachute deployed. Their descent slowed, but Ricky's heart still pounded as the unforgiving lunar surface rushed up to meet them. They hit hard, the pod's shock absorbers groaning under the strain. For a moment, all was still. "You okay?" Ricky rasped, ears ringing from the impact. Deneb nodded weakly. "I think so. We made it." They crawled from the crumpled wreckage on shaky legs. Ricky helped Deneb over a tangle of metal, her twisted limb making the task difficult. As the dust settled, Ricky's blood ran cold. The massive shape of the Vorkarian dreadnought loomed in the sky above, growing larger by the second. "We need to move, now!" Ricky grabbed what supplies he could, a few ration packs, a canteen, a busted comms unit. They fled across the barren landscape, jagged rocks scraping their legs as they stumbled into a maze of canyons. Ricky's combat instincts kicked in, leading them on a winding path to throw off pursuit. Behind them, the whine of Vorkarian hunter-killer drones grew louder. Days blurred together as they pushed deeper into the hostile terrain. Ricky rationed their meager supplies, but thirst clawed at his throat. Deneb fared better, her alien biology allowing her to extract moisture from the very rocks. Still, exhaustion took its toll on them both. "There," Deneb wheezed, pointing to a dark crevice. "Caves! We can lose them in there." They ducked inside, just as a Vorkarian patrol soared overhead. The labyrinth of tunnels offered sanctuary, but also new dangers. Every shadow held the potential for ambush. Ricky fumbled with the broken comms unit. "If I can just boost the signal." A burst of static, then silence. Footsteps echoed through the tunnels. They'd been found. Ricky and Deneb backed into a dead end, weapons raised. As the first Vorkarian rounded the corner, Ricky opened fire. The cramped space erupted in chaos, muzzle flashes illuminating snarling alien faces. Just as their ammo ran dry, a thunderous boom shook the cavern. Human Marines in powered armor poured in, catching the Vorkarians in a deadly crossfire. In moments, it was over. Ricky sagged against the wall in relief as medics rushed to tend their wounds. Soon they were loaded onto an armored dropship, leaving the Nightmare Moon behind. But as they sped towards safety, a chilling sight greeted them. An immense Vorkarian armada filled the view screen, fresh reinforcements arriving to continue the invasion. Ricky squeezed Deneb's hand. Their ordeal was not nearly finished. The vast expanse of space lit up with the brilliant flashes of plasma fire. Ricky's eyes widened as he watched the human rescue fleet vanish into slipspace, leaving their dropship alone against the Vorkarian armada. "Shit!" the pilot cursed, frantically working the controls. "Slipspace drive's not responding." A violent jolt rocked the ship. Sparks erupted from a nearby console as alarms blared. Ricky stumbled, catching himself on a bulkhead. "We're hit!" Deneb cried out, her alien features contorted with fear. Ricky's mind raced. He sprinted to the command console, fingers flying across the interface. Sealing blast doors, initiating emergency protocols. The dropship lurched, tumbling end over end as it plummeted towards Vorkar's outer orbits. Ricky's stomach churned with each rotation. "Deneb, see if you can reroute power to the hyperdrive," he shouted over the cacophony of alarms. She nodded, dragging herself to a nearby terminal. Her misshapen limbs trembled as she worked, desperation evident in every movement. Ricky's gaze locked onto the tactical display. A swarm of red dots converged on their position, Vorkarian hunter-killers closing in for the kill. "Come on, give me something," he muttered, scanning the weapon systems. Most were offline, but one indicator blinked green. EMP cannon. That'll have to do. He activated the weapon, watching as crackling bolts of energy lanced out towards the approaching fighters. Several winked off the display, disabled by the electromagnetic pulse. "Ricky!" Deneb's voice carried a note of hope. "I'm picking up a signal. It's faint, but it's from my father's old base." His heart leapt. "Can you reach them?" "I'll try." Her fingers danced across the interface. "Sending distress call now." The ship shuddered as another blast rocked it. Ricky staggered to Deneb's side, helping her into an environment suit. "We're losing power fast," he said, sealing his own helmet. "I'm diverting everything to a force field around the bridge. It won't last long, but it might buy us enough time." They huddled together as the protective bubble flickered to life around them. Outside, space burned. Vorkarian ships unleashed a relentless barrage, their weapons tearing through the dropship's hull. Ricky gripped the EMP cannon controls, firing off pulse after pulse. It was like trying to stop a tsunami with a bucket. For every hunter-killer he disabled, 10 more took its place. A blinding flash filled the view screen. For a moment, Ricky thought it was over. Then he realized the explosions weren't centered on their ship, but on the Vorkarian vessels themselves. "The rebels," Deneb breathed. "They got our message." The dropship plunged through the chaos, hurtling towards the lunar surface. Ricky braced for impact, shielding Deneb with his body as they crashed. When the dust settled, Ricky found himself lying in twisted wreckage. Pain lanced through his body. He struggled to his feet, pulling Deneb up beside him. "We need to move," he rasped, supporting her weight as they stumbled from the crash site. The lunar landscape stretched before them, a barren hellscape of jagged rocks and radiation-scorched plains. In the distance, Ricky spotted movement, Vorkarian troops deploying from their landing craft. They limped forward, each step in agony. Ricky's suit sensors blared warnings about the lethal radiation levels. He positioned himself to shield Deneb as best he could, watching her life signs fluctuate on his HUD. A whine filled the air, hunter-killer drones closing in. Ricky's hand went to his sidearm, knowing it would do little good against the mechanical terrors. Then he saw it, a shimmer in the rocky terrain ahead. As they drew closer, a hidden doorway materialized. Plasma bolts sizzled past them as rebel Vorkarians emerged, laying down covering fire. Inside, quickly! One of the rebels shouted. Ricky half-carried, half-dragged Deneb across the final stretch. They tumbled through the entrance as it sealed behind them, muffling the sounds of battle outside. Safe for the moment, Ricky sank to his knees. He looked to Deneb, seeing the pain etched on her face. Blood seeped from a wound in her side. "Hold on," he pleaded, cradling her in his arms. "Help's here. We made it." But as he gazed into her eyes, he saw the light fading. She reached up, touching his face with trembling fingers. "I love you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Ricky's vision blurred with tears. "I love you too. Just stay with me, okay? Stay with me." He held her close, willing her to keep breathing, unaware of the devastation unfolding above. The war that would reshape galaxies had only just begun, and Ricky found himself once again at its heart, alone, surrounded by death, with nothing left but the fading warmth of the woman he loved.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.